Let me show you how to dodge and burn your portrait photos as we take this photo and turn it into this. In the previous video, we used Luminar NEO's portrait editing tools to create this. It's that photo that we're now going to take one step further. We're going to dodge and burn and create a beautiful black and white image. Before we get into editing this portrait in Luminar NEO, let me just quickly explain what dodging and burning is. It's literally the process of making certain areas in our photos brighter and certain areas darker. So when we brighten an area up, that is known as dodging, and when we darken an area, that is known as burning. And I think a good way to remember that is when you burn something, it just ends up as a charred black mass. So you're burning something down, you're making it darker. So let's get into Luminar NEO and see how it works. So we've already done a lot of the portrait editing in the previous video, which I'll link to in the description below, just in case you missed it. However, in this one, we just want to work on the black and white. So I'm going to convert this. All we need to do is convert to black and white. Then we do have access to the actual color sliders, which allow us to change the brightness level based on the color of the underlying photo. So I can control how bright the background is by grabbing the blue slider and moving that. Now, I don't want to lose her dark hair against the dark background. So while she looks like she's popping off against the background a little better when I reduce the blue, I actually want to keep that level of separation. So I'm going to just boost that up for now. And I'm not worried about making too many other changes there, because the main thing we want to do in this video is work on our dodge and burn. And so that exists in the professional tab here, and we come to dodge and burn. So we have our options to either lighten the image, darken the image, or erase what we've done. And we have an overall amount slider here. So what I'd recommend you do is start with the amount slider pretty high. And I would also recommend, rather than doing lighten and darken in the same tool, just separate the tools. As you know, you can apply one instance, make some changes, and then you can close that down and bring in a brand new version of that tool. So we're going to work on one version, which is going to be for lighten. So let's make a start there. Just to demonstrate, I'm just going to click and start dragging over this image. So you can see as I paint this in, I can just start brightening this up wherever. If I switch over to darken, I'll push the strength to 100, we can see exactly what goes on here. We start to darken the photo down. And then if you don't like what you've done, you can switch to the erase tool and just remove the effect. So here's our before and here's our after. And obviously, as I say, the amount slider just lets us set the amount. So let's reset that and actually do something more useful. I would actually like to start by darkening some of her features down. So when you're working with dodge and burn, you've got a couple of options. You can either accentuate the contrast that is already there, or you can remove contrast if you want to. And that can be really useful for smoothing out values in skin tones. So for example, if we were to start with lighten, what we could do is actually start brightening up the area under her eye here. I'm at a strength of 34 at the moment, and this is far too rough and ready and very crude, but here's our before, here's our after. Just to give you an example, I would never apply it that strongly, and I would recommend starting with a strength, I don't know, about 10's good. And we could do the same thing and just start building it up just a little bit slower and doing it in several passes, and that just allows us just a little bit more precision. And then we can look at our before and our after, and you can see how by dodging that area we removed that shadow. Okay, because I've closed that down, it's jumped over into the edit section, so I'm just going to throw that away, and this version here as well. And let's come back down and we're going to start again. I'm in lighten mode, so let's just start there. Let's start lightening up. So what I'd like to do is actually boost up the brightness on her cheeks, because I like to give female models the sense of more three-dimensionality in their cheekbones. So we can brighten up the cheekbone, and then we can darken the shadow underneath, helping to give it that sense of three-dimensionality. Now currently I'm just building this up with kind of full intensity, and I'm just accentuating areas that are bright. I'm just brightening them a little more. So before and after, and it's too much, but don't forget we've got this amount slider, so I'm going to be able to dial this effect back. And we've also got the erase brush, so if I feel like I've gone over an area too strongly, like the side of her cheek here, I can come in with the erase brush and just ease it back a little bit. You can see that there's just a tiny bit of light hitting the bottom of her chin here, and we can again accentuate that just to help kind of give this sense of three-dimensionality. Now I'm doing this with a mouse, which is exceptionally difficult, and if you've got yourself a Wacom tablet like I do, I would strongly recommend you use it. However, I'm just trying to do this with a mouse to show you guys that it is possible. And I kind of work with this kind of back and forth technique of laying in the effect and then erasing it with a nice soft eraser. And I really don't think I'm going to win this challenge of trying to get a nice smooth curve with a mouse. Here's our before, here's our after. It's just a little kiss of light which is helping to give separation to her jaw from her neck. We can also use the lighten effect just to brighten up the whites of the eyes as well. But as you've seen, Luminar does have a dedicated tool for doing this. So this manual approach is great for having a little bit more control. But if you're in a pinch for time and you just want it done, then obviously you can use the slider in the portrait tools. I like to brighten up the bottom of the iris. It just helps to give the eye a little bit more depth. Before and after, before and after. And I just keep building up this effect, looking at the three-dimensionality of the face and just adding highlights where they need to be. And if you make a mistake, just press Ctrl-Z on your keyboard. If you want to make a nice straight line like I do up the nose there, you can just make one click, hold the Shift key and click again. So for example, let's make a straight line from here. I'll click once and now I'll hold Shift and click here. And I've just created a straight line down there. It's probably not that easy to see because I'm building this up subtly. However, if you do want a straight line, that's the best way to do it. And I've gone over the edge just a little bit there, so I'm using the erase tool just to take that away. Let's have a little look how we're doing with the lighten. Here's our before, here's our after, before and after. We can do things like brighten the highlight on her lips, even brighten the little highlights around here on her ear as well, even on her earring. Now you can see that she's got some very faint crease lines there which really don't bother me too much at all. However, I am just going to show you how you can get rid of those. I've just reduced the strength just down ever so slightly so I can do this very softly, and I'm just going over the darker areas with the brighten. So it's just lightening up those shadow areas. So now let's toggle the before and the after. You can see how we're able to remove those. I'm just going to brighten the top of her chin slightly as well. And you can even remove little lines like this if you want to, but you've really got to walk that line carefully because you don't want to remove lines that make up the character of somebody's face. However, she's got some little bumps here on her skin that the original Skin AI application we put on didn't actually take care of. So what you can do again is just come in and where you've got shadow areas, just add some of that lighten effect. And it's just going to get rid of them because after all they're just three-dimensional shapes, just little bumps on the skin. So we can just remove them. And if you go wrong, just erase it. So let's see our before and our after, before and after. We've been able to get rid of that. Now currently I know this looks quite fake, but I am going to reduce the amount. I like to work with the amount at 100 so that I can see exactly what I'm doing and then we can drop it back to a place where we feel a little bit happier with it. So I'm just going in with this dodge effect, brightening around her collarbone and her neck, just helping to bring out a bit of definition, a bit of three-dimensionality. And this technique works for any three-dimensional shape that you want to work on, any three-dimensional shape. So I'm brightening up the left side of her arm here and just helping to guide the viewer's eye, even brightening the fingers and the hands as well. And once you've worked on the body, we can brighten up the dress, bring in a little bit more highlight there. And I don't really like the shadow around the neckline here, so I'm using our dodging technique just to brighten that up. So currently that's our lighten effect. Let's look at our before and our after, before and after. And now we can come in with the erase tool, make sure that we're not erasing too much of it. Let's go for about an eraser strength of 1/3. And now I'm just working to minimize the intensity of some of that brightening effect that I've done. And it's just a bit of a dance back and forth between applying the lightening and reducing it. And again, check our before and our after, before and after. And now we can just ease that amount back. So here's 0, here's 100, 0 and 100. And let's just give this a little wiggle until we're happy. Let's go somewhere around 76. All right, before and after. Okay, now let's do some sculpting with the burn tool. Now I could totally grab darken and start working away. However, I don't want to do that. I want to separate my light and my dark layer. So I'm going to close that down, open a brand new layer, and now I'm going to apply this with dark. And that's going to allow me to have a different amount value for the dark if I want to. So there's my first stroke, and I certainly don't want my strength set to 100. Far too much. So I'll reset that, bring the strength down, probably 5. Let's try that. Okay, and I'll start there. Literally, I just click and I build this effect up. And if I make a mistake, I just press Ctrl-Z to undo it. So all I'm looking to do as I'm painting in this shadow effect, this burning down, is I'm looking to sculpt the 3D form again. And unlike just applying any old contrast effect to the photo, this gives us specific control over where exactly we want to paint and darken down. So not only can we enhance the form that we've captured in our photo, but we can actually resculpt the light, just bend it to our will and make the photo look the way we want it to look. When we're working on a portrait, I don't recommend that we try and alter the way somebody looks, but merely we enhance what is already there. So I'm just building this effect up with slow passes. I recommend that you just exercise a bit of patience, and I've sped this up because you don't really see the changes that are going on in real time, but I'm just clicking, painting, releasing, clicking, painting, going over it and building up. And I recommend you just keep checking where you came from and where you've got to, just to check that you're on the right path. And don't forget, you've always got that amount slider that you can be reducing afterwards, so you can just bring that effect back in, and you've also got the erase tool that you can apply as well. I'm just zooming into the lips here because I just want to add a little bit of more form to the lips, a bit of definition. So I'm just darkening around the base of her lips, and when we combine that with the brighten effect, the dodge that we put on that highlight before, and so just by darkening those already existing shadows on the lips, we're able to give the lips more of a three-dimensional form. They look more rounded. That addition of the shadow underneath, the brightening of the highlight in the previous lighten layer is really helping to bring those out. So how far you take this dodge and burn technique and how long you spend on it is entirely up to you. The longer you spend, more often than not, the better the results will be. But if you want to, you can use this concept and just apply it pretty globally. Just brighten one side of the face, darken the other. You don't have to be super specific and really get into the details of the face if you don't want to. But ultimately, dodge and burn is so valuable, particularly with black and white, because we're trying to depict a three-dimensional scene in just a two-dimensional medium. So all we have to give those visual cues to our viewers is playing with contrast. Dodge and burn isn't the only way that we can do that, of course, so let's investigate some other techniques that we can use to really help this black and white portrait pop. Okay, first things first, let's reduce the amount of this darkening effect. We've gone a little heavy-handed, so probably only around 50%. Let's have a look at our before and our after. It's certainly still benefiting the photo. So let's close this down and let's start thinking about other methods for introducing contrast. Well, a really great way to apply local contrast is with Structure AI. So I'm just going to grab the amount slider and start boosting this up and have a look at our photo. And whenever I make these kind of changes in my editing, I'm not looking at the photo as a whole. I'm training my eye to look around at different areas of the photo and just ask myself, are there areas that benefit from this effect? And I'm looking at her dress and thinking, it's getting a nice bit of pop there. I'm also looking at her hair, and it's also bringing out detail in what was previously a bit of a black lump of hair. So now we're actually getting some hair strands. So I'm going to come into my masking section. I'm going to grab a brush and I'm just going to quickly paint this in where I want it. So we'll put some of it in the hair, maybe a little over the ear as well, and just bring out some definition down there. And I was quite liking what it was doing in the pattern of the chair as well. The details in the dress were being brought out, perhaps even her hands. Yep, let's put a little bit over there, and let's put some more into the dress as well. Now you can see there's a slight wrinkle in the dress just down here, so I'm going to make sure I'm not actually accentuating that. I certainly don't want to bring attention to it. Whereas if we toggle our before and after, it's pretty good what it's doing for the rest of it. Might be a little bit heavy-handed at the bottom here. So we're just going to erase that with 50% and take that away from the bottom of the dress. A little can go a long way. A really easy tool to use that gives us a good bang for our buck is the vignette tool. So I'm going to push the amount all the way to -100. Far too much, but it's going to allow us to see what's going on when we're making changes. So I'm just going to change the shape of this so that it kind of flatters our bride a little better. I usually feel that vignettes look better when they are feathered rather than being more abrupt, so we're just going to feather this one in a little bit. And I'm also going to play with the inner light. Obviously we don't want to overexpose anything, but perhaps we do just want to pop in a little bit of brightness into that center. Let's have a look at our before and our after certainly guides our eye to the center of the frame. We can also choose the subject, so we can actually bring this up a little higher so that we're not actually darkening any of her head there, but we're certainly darkening down the bottom of the dress, probably a little bit too much. And so I'm going to reduce the amount so it's not as intense. Here's our before, here's our after. Again, a little going a long way. All right, let's start looking at contrast itself. I'm going to jump into the develop section here, and we've got two options that are really useful for dealing with contrast. One would be the smart contrast slider, which is really great, particularly for black and white, so I really like that. And we've also got the option to play around with an S curve in the curve section as well. For now, I'm just going to stick with smart contrast, so I'll double click that to reset it. And 100% is probably too much, but let's see whether we can't go for a little bit of this and paint it more over our bride. So again, masking, let's come into mask AI and actually do a quick mask and use Luminar to select her shape. So I'll just click on human, and for some reason Luminar keeps thinking that the chair is part of her. Don't know why, but anyway, let's come in and just erase that. I'm really not too troubled by that because it's not perfect, but I've been able to get a really good selection of her really quickly. So that's actually very efficient. So here was our before, here was our after. If we close it down and reopen it, we have access to a brand new version of Develop, which we can make further changes. And this time I'm going to jump straight into the curves tool. So I'm bringing the right point up here. And what that's going to do is allow me to make sure that I have a pure white pixel in this photo. Currently we can't see any warnings, so I'm just going to click the J key, and now everywhere that we see these little red dots, that is letting me know that I'm blowing this image out in those areas. So I don't want to go beyond pure white. So as soon as I start seeing those little red warnings, I know we're good to go. And now the same for the blacks as well. If I start bringing that down, anywhere that we see blue, we've crushed that down to pure black. And I don't want to lose detail in my black. Look at that, that's perfect. I just want to make sure that we have a full dynamic range from pure black through to pure white. Now I'll turn my warnings off and let's look at our before and our after. Before and after. That's nice, there's a lot more pop to this already. But now we've moved these endpoints, we can still come in and further refine our contrast. So if we want to make sure we've got some nice bright highlights, we just bring this point up above that 45-degree line. And then if we want to bring our midtones down, we just bring that middle point down. We can bring the shadows down further as well for even more contrast. How far you push that is entirely up to you and what aesthetic you're going for. But let's look at our before and after. Look at the impact, look at the change of that. Here's our before, here's our after. What a difference. Now I was going to leave the video there because I think I'm actually losing my voice, but I really want to show you one more tip. You know, I always like to give you something a little bit extra. So we've created a really punchy and strong black and white. It's very high contrast, but what can make an image pop even more is if we use a comparative technique. You imagine a very strong contrast against something that's kind of tepid, it's just going to look more impactful. So what we're going to do now is use curves to actually reduce the contrast, and then I'm going to use the mask tool to reveal this more punchy version through in areas where I want people to look. So by combining this kind of visual juxtaposition where we have less contrast adjacent to more contrast, I think we're going to create a really punchy image. So let me show you how to do that before I completely lose my voice. Let's close that version with the high contrast curves and come in, and this time we're going to make an adjustment. So rather than bringing those black points in and the white points in to create more contrast, this time I'm going to bring the black point up to reduce contrast, and also do the same with the white, bring it down to reduce contrast. So basically the flatter we get this line here, further away from 45 degrees and closer to a flat line, our image effectively flat lines. We're just creating a grey image when that goes flat. And so using that knowledge, we're going to just bring down the white point and push up the black point. We don't have to go that extreme with it. Previously we pumped in a load of contrast by bringing this point down, bringing the highlight point up. Well, again, we're going to use that knowledge to our advantage and actually go the opposite way. We're going to boost the shadows up and we're going to bring the highlights down, thus reducing contrast. So if we look at our original version that we have here, and we have our new version with our reduction of contrast, now we can use a mask to just paint back in the more contrasty version. So I'm going to get a brush here, I'm going to drop the strength to around 1/3, and now wherever I paint, I'm going to remove the version with the flattened contrast, and we're going to start to show back through the more punchy version. And I just need to keep going over the areas that I want to reveal the greater contrast. I'll just feather that out so we have a softer transition. Let's look how we're going before and after. I kind of feel like we're losing that effect a bit, so let's reduce the contrast towards the bottom of her body, and that will help to bring our eye up more towards her face. So here's our before, here's our after. And I'll be honest, I thought that was going to look better than what it does, so what I'm going to do as one final step is actually just do another slight pop of contrast, and because we've painted that in with a mask in the lower half, that's going to help bring our viewer's eye to the brighter area, which is her face. Okay, there we go, a nice black and white portrait conversion with dodge and burn along the way. Now it's time for my favourite bit, which is our before and after. Let's have a look at our original raw file, which we then processed in Luminar NEO in the previous video, and the link to that is in the description, and compare that to our black and white. Here's our original colour, and here's our black and white that we created. But I think in order to get a better feel for what we've actually created with our black and white image here, let's start with just a desaturated version of our starting point. Here we go. That's that. Just a desaturated version of our base layer. And here's what we were able to create using the dodge and burn technique and some contrast work with the curves. So our original desaturated black and white and our version with dodge and burn. Please do let me know what you think to the edit and the video tutorial as well in the description below. And if editing black and white is your thing, I've put together this video here that I think you might like where I've edited a cityscape. So if travel photography, black and white, that sort of thing is your thing, please check out that video right there, and I'll see you over there. Bye bye for now.